Kings fans continue to vent about Rob Blake, and they've included Marc Bergevin, plus where should Quinton Byfield play, and more on this feedback edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment and some feedback on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we are on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. It is Friday. That means it's our weekly fan feedback show. We've got lots of emails to get to, so let's get right into it. And we'll start with Scott in Simi Valley, who's a regular emailer, and he says, it's earlier in the week for an email, as I read these emails in the order in which they were received. And by the way, I also have to cut down on some of them for editing purposes. Hope you guys understand that. But again, Scott in Simi Valley, it's early in the week for an email, but I feel so uncomfortable about the Kings' future, I needed to vent. I wanted to remind myself and all Kings fans that Rob Blake has been making strange decisions for years. In fact, all through his tenure. This is nothing new. I think many of us, myself included, are guilty of being surprised and disgusted only with his moves over the last year or so, and I wonder if we should be surprised. Way back in June of 2018, Blake signed 35-year-old Ilya Kovalchuk to a 3-year, $18 million contract, a deal that tanked miserably, and then a few months later, in November of 2018, made the boneheaded move of hiring Willie Desjardins to be the Kings head coach. These choices are good examples of Blake's MO, and his judgment has been mostly bad all along. As the Kings acquired tons of draft picks, there was much optimism, and we threw our support behind Blake regardless of these initial blunders, and that was fair back then. Obviously, things have changed. Blake's blunders have torched many of our assets in an unbelievable short amount of time, and now the focus is thrust on Quinton Byfield as the media is calling on him to elevate his game even faster next season. I hope he can, but if not, and the Kings go backwards, it surely won't be on Q or any individual player. I had heard the Kings went after Steven Stamkos, but great players don't want to come here. It's costly, traffic sucks, and most of all, management is a joke. I'm hoping the Kings owners give a damn and get out the broom before our brightest young players decide to bail out. Again, that was from Scott in Simi Valley. We've talked about this. It's in the works. I'm going to do a deep dive on the tenure of Rob Blake, where we can go across all of his moves, look at the good and the bad, and probably the ugly as well. Now, it hasn't all been bad. He's made some good moves, just like any general manager. Nobody, I've said this before, no GM out there is batting 1,000. But certainly in the past little while, you talk about Cal Peterson, you talk about Pierre-Luc Dubois, there have been some pretty big blunders of late, for sure. But we need to look at the totality of his career and really see what is fair and what is unfair, I think. And that's in the works as far as something that I'm working on. As far as players not wanting to come here, I would say, first of all, Quinton Byfield, I don't think there's any undue pressure on him from media or anyone else in the organization for him to suddenly blossom into a superstar next year. He's still developing. He played one good year. If he moves to center, more responsibilities, I think we all need to be understanding and somewhat patient that he is still learning at the highest level. He's showed glimpses of greatness, but great players are great consistently. Whether he turns into that or not, we'll see. But it's not, I think next year, I don't think should be some sort of determining factor on what his career is going to be. He's still developing. He's still turning into what we hope would be a great NHL player. As for Steven Stamkos and players not wanting to come here, we have another email about this as well. And I guess I'll save my opinion for that at that time. Let's get to the next email. This comes from Eric in Las Vegas. And actually, he is chiming in on this, what we were just talking about. He says, I haven't written in a while, but I'm still an everydayer. I was wondering if the Kings went after bigger name players in free agency, but were turned down due to high cost of living and taxes in California. I reluctantly left Los Angeles in 2005 and moved to Las Vegas due to the cost of living myself. What do you think? Go Kings go. And again, that was Eric in Las Vegas. One of my favorite quotes of all time is a quote from an old, long since dead TV executive. And he said, quote, "The answer to all your questions is money," end quote. If you pay a player enough money, he'll go anywhere to play. And certainly we've seen with the Dodgers and the Lakers, it is kind of apples and oranges. It's not exactly the same thing, but Shohei Ohtani signed with the Dodgers. LeBron James at one time signed with the Lakers. So it's not like it's just that. However, I think it would be naive to also think that doesn't play a factor. And you look at Steven Stamkos in particular, who was brought up just a moment ago. He signed with Nashville. There's no state income tax in Tennessee. California has the highest income tax in the United States. You're going to make more money if you play for the Nashville Predators than if you play for the LA Kings. And obviously that is important to players. It's also important how much it costs to live in a place. I'm guessing it costs a lot less to live in Nashville than it does in LA. Now, there's a lot of great things about Los Angeles. I love it here. I have no plans that I'm ever leaving. But again, the reality is what it is. And if players can make more money in one place than another, that is going to be a determining factor. Absolutely. We got this from Jim in San Dimas, and he wrote a lot of stuff here. And Jim, obviously, I couldn't read it all. I mean, I read it all, but I can't share it all with everyone because it was a lot of information. And I'm glad you're feeling better. By the way, he shared that he is coming out of long COVID, which was something that Jonathan Taves of the Blackhawks still has not recovered from, and it may have ended his career. So that's no joke. So, Jim, I'm glad you're feeling better. Thank you for all of the information you sent. I tried to hit on the key points, and we'll share those with everybody out there. So, Jim in San Dimas says, "I'm interested in and continually learning about AI, data analytics, and knowledgeable worker tools. My hobbies include following the LA Kings and hockey in general. I am developing tools to practice and learn AI and programming. I only make real projects. I want to make tools like Cap Friendly, which is a website that just actually went dark, short hockey training animations using 3D and OpenAI Sora. I'm interested in exploring how NHL data analytics leverage advanced statistics and decision-making models to provide valuable insights to teams specifically." And he had a list of things. I tried to pick out a couple of the ones that made the most sense to me. He said, "How do analytics integrate data from various sources? For example, on-ice performance, off-ice training, medical records to create a comprehensive player profile. When predictive modeling techniques are employed to forecast player development and team performance, what tools and software platforms are commonly used in NHL analytics departments? How are teams using data analytics in draft preparations and player acquisition decisions? Additionally, it would be interesting to explore some case studies or examples of how data analysis has led to significant improvements or strategic shifts for specific teams or players. A podcast topic might be contrasting the two methods used in the organization. Marc Bergevin, the director of amateur scouting for the LA Kings, is known for his analytical approach. It would be fascinating to understand how he integrates data analysis into scouting processes and how it has contributed to the Kings' draft success." Again, that was from Jim in San Dimas, who I'm going to say a little bit smarter than me. I will admit that analytics is something that I have not had a great lot of success in grasping. Some people are equipped to for numbers and those kinds of things, and that ain't me. And that's a blind spot for me as a host. And I certainly recognize analytics is a growing part of sports. I'm pretty old school. I do think there is value in it. I also think that sometimes it's overused. Seems like the Dodgers are doing that in a lot of ways. But regardless, I would say my response to your email, Jim, is if you haven't listened to the interviews with Marc Bergevin on the All the Kings Men podcast, and then there was the other podcast with John Hoven and Dennis Bernstein, I think is Kings of the Podcast. They both interviewed Marc Bergevin, and I heard the one with Jesse Cohen and Zach Dooley. I didn't hear the other one, but he's fascinating to listen to. If you haven't heard those interviews, I would suggest going and finding those and listening to those and just hearing about his process and in his theories and philosophies when it comes to drafting players. I don't know how detailed he gets into the specific analytics and the data and all those kinds of things, but I think you'll find that informative if you have not heard it. I do want to get in on one more email here. This is from Brian in Cave Creek, Arizona. He says, if I had to guess, the most important players for the future of the Kings are Quinton Byfield and Brandt Clark. Byfield has a couple of seasons under his belt, but Clark has maybe 20 games. Maybe Rob Blake's plan is to pair Joel Edmondson with Clark on the third pairing to protect the future star in Clark, hopefully. Edmondson has a much bigger and badder reputation than Andreas Englund. With him on the ice with Clark, I think players will think twice about taking shots or harassing the rookie. You might even give him a little extra space to move around, just thinking that might be the plan for a year or two while Clark gets used to the NHL. Spence, I think, can play on the second pairing with Gabby. If they start Clark on the second pairing and keep Spence on the third, I'm not sure I know what the thinking is of this signing, or maybe I had too many tequila shots after hearing of their free agent signings. That was from Brian in Cave Creek, Arizona. Well, I will say this about Joel Edmondson and Andreas Englund. If you want somebody who's a protector, it would be Andreas Englund. He had 11 fighting majors last year, believe it or not, which I was a bit surprised it was that high. In the last 4 seasons, Joel Edmondson has had 4 fighting majors. So if you're looking for someone to be a personal protector to Brandt Clark, I think Andreas Englund would probably be better suited in that role. But I don't think Clark needs protecting. I mean, this is a different era of the NHL. It's not I'm not saying it isn't valuable to have a player like that occasionally, but I think Brandt Clark will be fine. I don't think he needs anybody out there as kind of a personal protector. And if there is going to be a personal protector, probably and Andreas Englund isn't playing, that would probably be Tanner Jeannot, who had 7 fighting majors last year. So if there is going to be a protector out there for anyone, look for Tanner Jeannot to do that for the Kings next season. We've got a lot more emails to get to. We will do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Drive, passion, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because of eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, we continue with your emails. Up next is Gary in Orange. He says, I would like to offer an unpopular yet optimistic take on the offseason, but my optimism comes with a caveat. I think the Kings will make the playoffs, but only if Byfield is the second center and Clark is on the second pairing. Moving Byfield to center would make our forward lines more balanced. Having a third line centered by Deneau would be difficult for the opposing teams to match up against. The Joel Edmondson signing seems like one of desperation. I am hoping that he can be a solid stay-at-home defenseman and provide the physicality that we need. Warren Foegele scored 20s last year, which would have been tied for 5th on the Kings, and I think he's good for at least 15 goals this season. In my scenario, he'd be on the second line with Byfield. Tanner Jeannot has a lot of upside and is a solid third-line player when his game is on. Finally, I'd like the idea of a fourth line consisting of Fogimo, Turcotte, and Thomas as the kids' energy line. Regarding Kaliev, instead of trading him since he's an RFA, would it be smart to wait for another team to sign him to an offer sheet, not match that offer, and get compensation picks in return? Again, that was from Gary in Orange. Certainly talking about Quinton Byfield and Brandt Clark. I think I'm curious to see how it all shakes out. I'm sure like you are. Like I said, I'm not sure if Q's ready to be a second line center at the NHL level. And Clark, again, I could see them easing him in, maybe starting him on the third pairing and then maybe elevating him to the second pairing. But that's asking a lot of 2 very talented but still very young players. As far as your question about an offer sheet for Arthur Kaliev, I mean, offer sheets are very rare in the NHL. And when they are offered, it's usually to a more high-profile player than Arthur Kaliev. So I don't think any team out there would tender an offer sheet on Arthur Kaliev. Our next email comes from Dan. He is actually, let me start with Robert. Robert is in parts unknown. And Robert, if you ever email again, include your location if you wouldn't mind. I just for my own personal sake, I like to know where people are from. But Robert says, just wondering if you're concerned about the Trevor Lewis signing. We had an abundance of bottom six forwards, and I believe almost all of them could have a spot in the lineup who are younger, need more playing time, and are quicker. So why re-sign Lewis? Well, I found out that he has 974 games played, so I bet he'd like to reach 1,000, but at what cost? Those 26 games could be given to someone like Fogimo, Kaliev's replacement, or Andre Lee. They could be invaluable to those young players who are fighting hard for a spot on the roster just to be paused on because Lewis would like to reach 1,000. I'm grateful for what he's done during the Stanley Cup runs, but I truly believe that if the Kings give any of those players 26 games, you'll have both an improved LA Kings roster and an opportunity to develop your prospects into true NHLers, which is better for the organization. I had said, I kind of speculated that Trevor Lewis might retire after last season or maybe join the Utah hockey team since he's a Utah native, and that would be a nice way to end his career. I was a little surprised that the Kings did bring him back. That said, they're paying him less than $1 million, and he's probably going to be up in the press box with me watching a lot of games, I would think. If that's not the case, if he's taking ice time away from a younger player that needs those minutes, I would have a problem with that. Sure, I'm sure he would love to get to 1,000 games. That's a significant milestone, and to do it with the team that he started his career with, I'm sure would be special as well. But like I said, it's unlikely the Kings are going to stay healthy enough to where he might not get 26 games, even if he is the first forward in the press box. But again, I will agree with you. If he is in the lineup more often than not, and there's a younger player up in the press box, that would not sit well with me either. This comes from Dan in Huntington Beach. He says, thank you for your interview with Austin Stanovich. I have been disheartened listening to other Kings podcasts that I highly respect, the Bannerman and Hockey Royalty, stating that Rob Blake didn't do enough at the trade deadline to improve the Kings, probably in free agency, and suggested that there is no plan for the team. I understand we did not acquire an impact player to significantly improve the team. I felt that way too. However, I am bothered by the narrative that Blake is a lame duck and has no plan for the future of the team. I do believe Blake has a plan. It may not be the plan we all wish for, but I have to believe he has a plan. Austin said the Kings did address a specific need for toughness and suggested that Blake's plan included Quinton Byfield moving to center and Clark making the team, bringing his scoring ability and improved defensive acumen. I want to get excited about next season. May I suggest an episode that explores our roster with our existing assets and projects or projects how the team would do next season, including a playoff run if our younger players performed to expectations, overperformed to expectations, or underperform. What would the team's point total be? Do they make the playoffs? How far do they go in the playoffs? Thanks for the great show and the amazing guests that you bring on, Eddie. Looking forward to attending one of your Locked On watch parties next season. Go Kings, go. And that, again, was from Dan in Huntington Beach. All right, thanks, Dan, for the email. I did a show on Tuesday where we asked the question, are the Kings a playoff team? I did detail the goals and points that the Kings lost with players that left or were traded away, and then added in the goals of the points of the players that were added in, and then kind of looked at what was the remaining numbers that needed to be filled. And as far as the players the Kings lost and the players that they brought in, I think they can fill the shoes of those players as far as their production goes, pretty well. So it's difficult to kind of predict point totals and things like that. Certainly we could do that for a show. But as far as, we know that I think we can fill the numbers that we lost pretty easily. I think we could even outperform them. But one thing that is, a part of that is that all the other Kings players need to not have any kind of a significant drop off from their numbers from a year ago. And we can't have any significant injuries. So there's that as well. And those are things you just can't predict. This comes from Wilson. He is in Quebec City, up in Canada. And he says, love your podcast. I rarely miss an episode on YouTube. I've been a Kings fan forever. I mean, as far back as Marcel Dion and the Triple Crown line. Like every Kings fan, I waited a long time for 2012 and 2014. Those two Stanley Cups for me rank among some of the greatest things in my life. We all understand that we can't win the cup every year. However, a steady decline of the Kings since Rob Blake appeared in the picture is quite alarming. To make matters even worse, they hired Marc Bergevin, who single-handedly destroyed the Montreal Canadiens. This past free agency has confirmed that neither one of these two incompetent people belong in the organization. And I must say that the one who let it all happen is Luc Robitaille, who should be put in question. The question is, can you beat the Edmonton Oilers, Dallas, Vegas, etc., and reach the finals and win? The answer is no. Then what has been achieved? Nothing. Blake must go, Bergevin should go away, and Luke needs a good talking to from ownership. Enough is enough. Hang in there, Eddie. Love watching. And again, that is from Wilson in Quebec City. And he added in his email, because I was going to say, oh, you're going to get to see the Kings in the preseason. They're playing games in Quebec City. He said he gave his tickets away because he's so disgusted with the Kings. That is, wow, that's a lot of disgust. If your favorite team that you've loved your whole life is coming to your city for no good reason and playing games, and you've said, no, I'm not going to watch them. My goodness, that is a level of disgust. I have heard a lot of people, and we're going to have a couple more emails, talk about Marc Bergevin and his role behind the scenes and how maybe he has way too much influence on what's going on. I don't know a lot about Marc Bergevin. I know he was the general manager in Montreal. I know he was their GM when they had that Cinderella Cup run, and I think he was up for GM of the year a couple of times. So he has some credentials, but overall, I don't know the details, because I know he got fired the next year in Montreal after they made it to that Cup run, which was a totally out of the blue thing. It was during it was during COVID, and for what that's worth. But yeah, there's been a lot of people who have mentioned his name, and as somebody who's maybe not the best influence with the Kings. We're going to get more into Marc Bergevin in a second. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I have used Gametime to buy tickets to NFL, college football, and NHL games, and I am a satisfied customer. The app is super easy to use and navigate. Just go on, tap the listings, sports, music, shows, and they'll list the tickets and the best deals. It's easy to search for tickets to teams and events, and you get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL, and you get $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right. Our next email comes from Brian. He is in Los Alamitos. He's another regular emailer, and he says, if Kings ownership decides to fire or not extend Rob Blake's contract, I think they also need to give Luc Robitaille the heave-ho as well. My biggest fear is that Blake is gone. Luc will simply slide in his buddy Marc Bergevin into the Kings GM position. I believe Bergevin was a major influence on Rob Blake's decisions to acquire Pierre-Luc Dubois as well as sign Joel Edmondson. Both Edmondson and Bergevin were in Montreal during their Stanley Cup run a few years back. One deal was a disaster, and the other looks like it's going to be as well. You spoke about how the Kings' young up-and-coming team was full of optimism, starting to take a bit of a downward turn a couple of years ago. Coincidentally, Bergevin was hired a couple of years ago as Blake's advisor. I know the buck stops with Blake, but I wonder just how much influence Bergevin has had on the Kings GM and the decisions he's made. Congrats on the 2-year anniversary and the accolades you received. Greatly deserved. And again, that was from Brian in Los Alamitos, also chiming in on Marc Bergevin. So very interesting. Our next email comes from John in Valencia, and John also sent me a lengthy email, all good stuff, interesting stuff. John, I promise you I read every second of it, but I can't include it all in this show because we don't have time. So I picked out the highlights. I hope you understand, but thank you for the time you took to send that email. But John does say, it was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer. We needed to get together, but to overspend and overcommit to do it is ridiculous. No-brainer that we needed to get tougher. Sorry about that. He says, I don't necessarily disagree with Byfield moving to center right away, but rushing him to be the franchise may be a bad move. One thing that really struck me is was mentioned Turcotte playing on the left wing with Kopitar and Kempe. I would like to see that, obviously, with Byfield moving to center. In regards to Monday's show, great take and breakdown on Edmondson. With the free agent choices, it seems you were picking all older players. in the latter part of their careers to join the Kings. But what about looking at some younger players that were not tendered qualifying offers like Logan Brown, Philip Zadina, and Alex Nylander? Given the situation, wouldn't you think we would try to bring in some of these guys on minimums? And if it doesn't work out, no harm, no foul. Something to keep an eye on in our back pocket. I hope the team is looking at the players involved in the 2018 Hockey Canada scandal. If the allegations are true, these players should never be allowed to play again. But in reading up on the issues, it could be a little fishy, like the Trevor Bauer allegations. I was up in the air on putting Byfield at center, but the more I think about it, I'm in agreement with you that we keep him with Kopi and Kempe to start the season. If he appears ready for the transition, then let it be done sometime in the season, maybe after the All-Star break. Most outlets have him as the third line center. To me, he should be the second line center. I've seen 5 or 6 articles now about the goalie prospect for the Nashville Predators, Yaroslav Askarov. I don't think a trade can be made before the season. I've seen different views on what they will be asking for. I think it must be looked at seriously, though, by Blake. I don't think we can wait long enough for Carter George or Hampton Slakinski. They're just too young at this point. An Askarov-Portillo tandem could build into Swayman-Ullmark, and you could trade the loser down the road. I'm with you. No Trouba move. All sorts of wrong with it. And it would be good with a Kaliev for Robertson trade with the Leafs if we move Kaliev. So lots of good stuff from John and Valencia touching on all of our shows, I think, this past week a little bit. And appreciate all of that. Again, I mentioned it earlier in the week. As far as the Kings getting Yaroslav Askarov to maybe be their solution down the road, I think that Nashville's probably going to be asking a lot, and I don't think the Kings necessarily have that to add. As far as the hockey scandal with those players, Carter Hart and others, yeah, that's a very delicate situation. That thing's going to need to play out completely, and they're going to need to be completely exonerated before teams really consider taking a run at those guys. And I don't know what the timeline is as far as that being cleared up one way or another. Our next email comes from Andrew. He is in Guelph, Ontario, and he says, I'm starting to shift from pure frustration to more optimism. Maybe it's going to take some chips to fall in the right places, and things could certainly lead us out of the playoffs, but perhaps there is more optimism. Edmonton, still bad. I'll leave it at that, but overall, they have some key pieces. I would love Turcotte to have a killer camp and claim the left wing spot with Kopi and Kempe. I like the idea of Fiala, Q, and perhaps Fogle. I think Deneau with Moore and LaFerriere would be a great 2B third line. I think Jeannot, Thomas, and Lewis for the fourth line. I'm assuming Kaliev has moved on. Specifically for the power play, I think it could be advantageous for Clark to be out there with Doughty. This shows Spence to still. This allows Spence to still grow and lead the second unit. It also gives the team another right shot on the power play. Clark could man the half wall, top of the circle, while Kempe and Drew patrol up top. There are holes. I'm still nervous, but hey, why not a little bright side for the summer months? Winter's coming here in Canada, so I'll take the warmth of optimism while I can. And again, that was Andrew in Ontario. Yeah, you know what? I was thinking about that too. What we're going to do with Spence and Clark. And if maybe those two guys play together, as you mentioned, maybe one of them plays with Drew Doughty. A lot of power plays in the NHL don't have two defensemen at the point much anymore. But then again, Brent Clark, I don't think is your typical defenseman either. So maybe that is a possibility. That would be interesting to see how that was. Another interesting thing to kind of look at. Darcy in Sylvan Lake, Alberta says, I've attached our defensemen with their salaries for the upcoming year and the 2 Stanley Cup years to this email. Obviously, I can't share that with you guys, but I looked at it. He says, when you look at the highlighted names from the 2 Cup years, you can't deny the importance of those tough defensive defensemen. Joel Edmondson is younger than any of them in those Cup years, except Matt Green. And it is also the least paid when it comes to percentages. I think Edmondson was a great pickup for the Kings, even at 4 years. Let's give the guy a chance. I think he is exactly what the back end needs. Go Kings, go. I won't agree that the length of the contract makes any sense. I think he's getting overpaid as well. That said, hopefully it works out. Look, I hope he brings an element of toughness. I hope that he's gonna, be a presence in the crease and keep guys out of there. But I'm hopeful. I'm not optimistic, but I am hopeful. One more email to squeeze in here, and I'm sorry, Edwin and Brea, we don't have time for your LA history, hockey history lesson this week. Maybe we can save it for next week. But Jonathan is in parts unknown. And Jonathan, if you decide to chime in again, let us know where you're from. He says, I started watching the NHL this season and really locked in this season. Holy S, this sport is exciting. I want to buy a King sweater, but not sure which player to get. After binge listening to all your podcasts, I realize the team isn't looking so hot right now, but I still want to rep the team. Any suggestions? That's not Gretzky. Well, Jonathan, certainly there are two players on the Kings right now that are all-time greats. You got Drew Doughty, the Kings' all-time best defenseman, and Andrei Kopitar, who I think is the best LA King of all time. Not saying he's the best player ever to wear a King sweater. I'm saying his career is the best of any LA King ever. So you can't go wrong with those two guys. But if you want somebody young, exciting, on the rise, hopefully, I think Quinton Byfield would be a good choice as well. That is going to do it for this fan feedback show. Thank you to everyone who took the time to chime in. Obviously, this show is literally not possible without your participation. So thank you guys very much for taking the time to do that. We do it every Friday throughout the season. If you want to send an email for a future show, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. If you want to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, and Instagram, we are at Locked On LA Kings. That's going to do it. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend. We will talk to you on Monday. And as always, go Kings, go.